Congratulations, you made it through your first 6 weeks in 6th grade. Now, for some of you, it's been quite a breeze, and I commend you for that. But for some of you, it's been a bit of a challenge. But don't worry, this is only the beginning, and it'll gradually get better as we go along. I promise. Now, before we begin recapping everything that you've learned this 6 weeks, I want to remind you to visit my YouTube channel, which is right here. And you can visit it anytime that you have any questions, or let's say you're not even my student and you just want to kind of find out about what you're learning in a 6th grade math class or what you should be learning, then by all means visit that link. Now, as far as vocabulary this 6 weeks, you were exposed to words such as integers, and which includes positive integers, negative integers, absolute value, opposites. You also learned about rational numbers, terminating decimals, repeating decimals, and then there's also bar notation. Now, before we, like I said, before we move on into the next 6 weeks, let's just kind of go over a little bit of what you learned. One of the first lessons you did was integers. And in that one, we talked about how, you have a positive, you have a negative number, and those are opposites right there. And then you've got 0, which is neither positive nor negative. It falls right in the middle of the two. Then the other lesson that we did was absolute value. And in regards to absolute value, one thing you have to understand, every time you find the absolute value of a number, it becomes positive, no matter what. So the main goal of that lesson was to understand that the absolute value of a number is how far away it is from 0. So if you're going to the negative side of a number line, you're asking yourself, how far away would you need to go to get to that number? That's absolute value. Or if it's positive, you're asking yourself, how far away do you need to travel to get to that particular number, that integer right there? And then the next lesson we did was ordering integers, actually putting these negatives and positives in order. And there's several ways to do it. One way is compare the signs. It's pretty obvious. If it's negative, it's probably going to be smaller than the positive number. Actually, not probably, it definitely will be. Another way to compare them would be by using a number line. Simply compare their location on that number line. The further it is on the left, the smaller it is. You're aiming towards the least. The further it is on the right side, you're leaning towards greatest, or a larger number. That was the main emphasis of that particular lesson. The next lesson, turning decimals to fractions. The main idea of that particular lesson was the way that you say that number, the way you read it, using proper place value, which you could use a place value chart for that, is, for example, if you have 6/10, the way it sounds, the way you hear it, it sounds like 6/10. And that's the way you turn it into a fraction. Or if you had, let's say, 45/100, it's as simple as just writing 45/100. Which connects to another lesson that we did, and that is turning fractions into decimals. You're going in reverse now. If you have a fraction and you want to go back to a decimal, because remember, they're very closely related, and so are percents, but we'll get to that later, actually in the second 6 weeks. But if you want to go from a fraction to a decimal, there's a lot of ways to do it. Two in particular are finding an equivalent fraction that has 100 as your denominator. So you can turn it into that by multiplying. For example, let's say you have 9/12, right? That's pretty much equivalent to 3/4. And you can turn that into 75/100 using multiplication. Now listen to the way it sounds, and that's also how you would write it as a decimal, 75/100. Or another way, one of my personal favorites, turning a fraction into a decimal by dividing. You would get your numerator inside, denominator outside, or as I call it in class, in and outs, and you divide. Make sure you add a decimal in your problem, and it's as simple as that. And the other aspect of fractions that you need to be aware of is simplifying. We didn't have a full lesson on that, but it's something you should have come into 6th grade knowing. But if you don't worry, that's what this video is for. You see, all you need to do to simplify a fraction is try dividing it by 2, 3, 4, 5, or if you know what this means, greatest common factor, you can divide it by that, or if you can identify a greater number that can go into both your numerator and your denominator. Okay? And you keep doing that. You divide, and if you can see that it can be simplified again by a number, do it again. And keep asking yourself, can I simplify it more and more and more? And if you can't, that's it. You're done. Now, as far as rational numbers are concerned, the main concepts in that lesson in particular was the thing about rational numbers is it's any number that can be turned into a fraction. It can include some integers. It can include some whole numbers. It can include a lot of different areas of math, different types of numbers. But the main idea there was you can turn them into fractions. You can express them as fractions. A couple other things about decimals that you need to know about. Terminating, repeating decimals, bar notation. What you need to know there is when you do that division, when you're turning a decimal or a fraction into a decimal, if you have to keep adding zeros to try to get rid of your remainders, because remember, it's middle school, we don't want remainders anymore. So if you keep adding zeros and you notice that it's not ending, you've got a repeating decimal. And the way you get, you kind of shorten that, because otherwise you'll be going on forever, you'll never be done. You just simply put a bar on top. And for those of you that took my challenge and looked up the name of that bar, you would put a vinculum on top. And that signifies that that number is going to go on forever. It'll never end, and you don't need to waste sheet after sheet of paper, just constantly dividing. You just understand that that's it, it's over, okay? If it does end, if you actually, add some zeros if it's necessary, and it actually comes to an end when you're dividing, that is a terminating decimal. So those are pretty much the basics that you need to know in regards to decimals and fractions. But we took it a step further. We multiplied decimals. And just the couple of tips on that. First of all, when you multiply them, it's the same basic steps as multiplying whole numbers. The only difference is you count how many digits are on the right of your decimals, and that's how many decimal places you would move when you place that actual decimal. So, for example, in this example, 8/10 times 9/10, your answer is 072. But if you look at it, there are 2 digits on the right of the decimals, so you would put your decimal between the 0 and the 7. As far as dividing decimals, remember that story that I told you. If you have a decimal outside and a decimal inside, think of it as for example, a little girl trying to get into a house, right? She wants to say hi to the little boy inside. So you have to count how many steps she needs to take to get to that front door. So in this particular example, she takes 1 step. And this boy, being shy, doesn't want to quite, say hi to this person. He sees her through the window of his door, and he takes a step back for every step that she takes. Like a mirror, he mirrors her movements. So she takes 1 step to the door, jumps over that 9. He takes a step back and jumps over that 7. And, of course, he starts knocking on that door, and wants to try to get his attention, trying to be social and say hi to this young man. And what does he do? He jumps up to the attic, stays right up there for the rest of that problem. Now, when you do that, you're left with an easier problem, something that you've handled before. It's just 9 going into 17.1. And that's just a lot easier to solve than having a decimal outside and a decimal inside. So that pretty much sums up what you learned this 6 weeks. But here's what's coming up. In the second 6 weeks, you should expect to see ratios, rates, the coordinate plane, converting units of measurements, like the metric system, the customary system. We're going to be going a little bit more into fractions again, but this time with a relationship with percents. We're also going to revisit decimals, and you're going to see their relationship with percents as well. And then we'll kind of sum up the second 6 weeks with algebraic relationships. So good luck. This is Onyx, Manager of Champions. And if you haven't been doing your homework for Mr. Byrd's class, well, let's just say I might have to bring a couple of wrestlers to inspire you.